the king who would have a beautiful wife. 50 years ago, there lived a king who was very anxious to get married, but as he was quite determined that his wife should be as beautiful as the sun, the thing was not so easy as it seemed, for no maiden came up to his standard. Then he commanded a trusty servant to search through the length and breadth of the land till he found a girl fair enough to be queen, and if he had the good luck to discover one, he was to bring her back with him. The servant set out at once on his journey, and sought high and low, in castles and cottages. But though pretty maidens were plentiful as blackberries, he felt sure that none of them would please the king. One day he had wandered far and wide, and was feeling very tired and thirsty. By the roadside stood a tiny little house, and here he knocked and asked for a cup of water. Now in this house dwelt 2 sisters, and one was 80 and the other 90 years old. They were very poor, and earned their living by spinning. This had kept their hands very soft and white, like the hands of a girl, and when the water was passed through the lattice, and the servant saw the small delicate fingers, he said to himself, "A maiden must indeed be lovely if she has a hand like that." And he made haste back, and told the king. "Go back at once," said his majesty, "and try to get a sight of her." The faithful servant departed on his errand without losing any time, and again he knocked at the door of the little house and begged for some water. As before, the old woman did not open the door, but passed the water through the lattice. "Do you live here alone?" asked the man. "No," replied she, "my sister lives with me. We are poor girls, and have to work for our bread." "How old are you?" "I am 15, and she is 20. Then the servant went back to the king and told him all he knew, and his majesty answered, "I will have the 15-year-old one. Go and bring her here." The servant returned a 3rd time to the little house and knocked at the door. In reply to his knock, the lattice window was pushed open, and a voice inquired what it was he wanted. "The king has desired me to bring back the youngest of you to become his queen," he replied. "Tell his majesty I am ready to do his bidding, but since my birth no ray of light has fallen upon my face. If it should ever do so, I shall instantly grow black. Therefore beg, I pray you, his most gracious majesty to send this evening a shut carriage, and I will return in it to the castle." When the king heard this, he ordered his great golden carriage to be prepared, and in it to be placed some magnificent robes, and the old woman wrapped herself in a thick veil and was driven to the castle. The king was eagerly awaiting her, and when she arrived he begged her politely to raise her veil and let him see her face. But she answered, "Here, the tapers are too bright and the light too strong. Would you have me turn black under your very eyes?" And the king believed her words, and the marriage took place without the veil being once lifted. Afterwards, when they were alone, he raised the corner and knew for the first time that he had wedded a wrinkled old woman. And, in a furious burst of anger, he dashed open the window and flung her out. But, luckily for her, her clothes caught on a nail in the wall and kept her hanging between heaven and earth. While she was thus suspended, expecting every moment to be dashed to the ground, 4 fairies happened to pass by. "Look, sisters," cried one. "Surely that is the old woman that the king sent for. Shall we wish that her clothes may give way, and that she should be dashed to the ground?" "Oh, no, no," exclaimed another. "Let us wish her something good. I myself will wish her youth, and I beauty, and I wisdom, and I a tender heart." So spake the fairies, and went their way, leaving the most beautiful maiden in the world behind them. The next morning, when the king looked from his window, he saw this lovely creature hanging on the nail. "Ah, "What have I done? Surely I must have been blind last night." And he ordered long ladders to be brought and the maiden to be rescued. Then he fell on his knees before her and prayed her to forgive him, and a great feast was made in her honor. Some days after came the 90-year-old sister to the palace and asked for the queen. "Who is that hideous old witch?" said the king. "Oh, an old neighbor of mine, who is half silly," she replied. But the old woman looked at her steadily and knew her again and said, "How have you managed to grow so young and beautiful? I should like to be young and beautiful too." This question she repeated the whole day long, till at length the queen lost patience and said, "I had my old head cut off, and this new head grew in its place." Then the old woman went to a barber and spoke to him, saying, "I will give you all you ask if you will only cut off my head, so that I may become young and lovely. But, my good woman, if I do that, you will die." But the old woman would listen to nothing, and at last the barber took out his knife and struck the first blow at her neck. "Ah!" she shrieked as she felt the pain. "Il faut souffrir pour être belle," said the barber, who had been in France. And at the second blow her head rolled off, and the old woman was dead for good and all. The little hare. A long, long way off, in a land where water is very scarce, there lived a man and his wife and several children. One day the wife said to her husband, "I am pining to have the liver of a nyamatsain for my dinner. If you love me as much as you say you do, you will go out and hunt for a nyamatsain and will kill it and get its liver. If not, I shall know that your love is not worth having." "Bake some bread," was all her husband answered. "Then take the crust and put it in this little bag." The wife did as she was told, and when she had finished, she said to her husband, "The bag is all ready and quite full." "Very well," said he, "and now goodbye. I am going after the nyamatsain." But the nyamatsain was not so easy to find as the woman had hoped. The husband walked on and on and on without ever seeing one, and every now and then he felt so hungry that he was obliged to eat one of the crusts of bread out of his bag. At last, when he was ready to drop from fatigue, he found himself on the edge of a great marsh, which bordered on one side the country of the Nyamatsanes. But there were no more Nyamatsanes here than anywhere else. They had all gone on a hunting expedition, as their larder was empty, and the only person left at home was their grandmother, who was so feeble she never went out of the house. Our friend looked on this as a great piece of luck, and made haste to kill her before the others returned, and to take out her liver, after which he dressed himself in her skin as well as he could. He had scarcely done this when he heard the noise of the Nyamatsanes coming back to their grandmother, for they were very fond of her, and never stayed away from her longer than they could help. They rushed clattering into the hut, exclaiming, "We smell human flesh! Some man is here!" and began to look about for him. But they only saw their old grandmother, who answered in a trembling voice, "No, my children, no. What should any man be doing here?" The Nyamatsanes paid no attention to her, and began to open all the cupboards and peep under all the beds, crying out all the while, "A man is here! A man is here!" But they could find nobody, and at length, tired out with their long day's hunting, they curled themselves up and fell asleep. Next morning they woke up quite refreshed and made ready to start on another expedition. But as they did not feel happy about their grandmother, they said to her, "Grandmother, won't you come today and feed with us?" And they led their grandmother outside, and all of them began hungrily to eat pebbles. Our friend pretended to do the same, but in reality he slipped the stones into his pouch and swallowed the crusts of bread instead. However, as the Nyamatsanes did not see this, they had no idea that he was not really their grandmother. When they had eaten a great many pebbles, they thought they had done enough for that day, and all went home together and curled themselves up to sleep. Next morning when they woke, they said, "Let us go and amuse ourselves by jumping over the ditch," and every time they cleared it with a bound. Then they begged their grandmother to jump over it too, and with a tremendous effort, she managed to spring right over to the other side. After this, they had no doubt at all of its being their true grandmother, and went off to their hunting, leaving our friend at home in the hut. As soon as they had gone out of sight, our hero made haste to take the liver from the place where he had hid it, threw off the skin of the old Nyamatsane, and ran away as hard as he could, only stopping to pick up a very brilliant and polished little stone, which he put in his bag by the side of the liver. Towards evening, the Nyamatsanes came back to the hut, full of anxiety to know how their grandmother had got on during their absence. The first thing they saw on entering the door was her skin lying on the floor, and then they knew that they had been deceived, and they said to each other, "So we were right after all, and it was human flesh we smelt." Then they stooped down to find traces of the man's footsteps, and when they had got them, instantly set out in hot pursuit. Meanwhile, our friend had journeyed many miles and was beginning to feel quite safe and comfortable when, happening to look round, he saw in the distance a thick cloud of dust moving rapidly. His heart stood still within him, and he said to himself, "I am lost. It is the Nyamatsanes, and they will tear me in pieces." And indeed the cloud of dust was drawing near with amazing quickness, and the Nyamatsanes almost felt as if they were already devouring him. Then, as a last hope, the man took the little stone that he had picked up out of his bag and flung it on the ground. The moment it touched the soil, it became a huge rock, whose steep sides were smooth as glass, and on the top of it our hero hastily seated himself. It was in vain that the Nyamatsanes tried to climb up and reach him. They slid down again much faster than they had gone up, and by sunset they were quite worn out and fell asleep at the foot of the rock. No sooner had the Nyamatsanes tumbled off to sleep than the man stole softly down and fled away as fast as his legs would carry him. And by the time his enemies were awake, he was a very long way off. They sprang quickly to their feet and began to sniff the soil round the rock, in order to discover traces of his footsteps, and they galloped after him with terrific speed. The chase continued for several days and nights. Several times the Nyamatsanes almost reached him, and each time he was saved by his little pebble. Between his fright and his hurry, he was almost dead of exhaustion when he reached his own village, where the Nyamatsanes could not follow him because of their enemies, the dogs, which swarmed over all the roads. So they returned home. Then our friend staggered into his own hut and called to his wife, "Ichu, how tired I am! Quick, give me something to drink. Then go and get fuel and light a fire." So she did what she was bid, and then her husband took the Nyamatsane's liver from his pouch and said to her, "There, I have brought you what you wanted, and now you know that I love you truly." And the wife answered, "It is well. Now go and take out the children, so that I may remain alone in the hut." And as she spoke, she lifted down an old stone pot and put on the liver to cook. Her husband watched her for a moment, and then said, "Be sure you eat it all yourself. Do not give a scrap to any of the children, but eat every morsel up." So the woman took the liver and ate it all herself. Directly the last mouthful had disappeared, she was seized with such violent thirst that she caught up a great pot full of water and drank it at a single draught. Then, having no more in the house, she ran in next door and said, "Neighbor, give me, I pray you, something to drink." The neighbor gave her a large vessel quite full, and the woman drank it off at a single draught and held it out for more. But the neighbor pushed her away, saying, "No, I shall have none left for my children." So the woman went into another house and drank all the water she could find. But the more she drank, the more thirsty she became. She wandered in this manner through the whole village till she had drunk every water pot dry. Then she rushed off to the nearest spring and swallowed that. And when she had finished all the springs and wells about, she drank up first the river and then a lake. But by this time she had drunk so much that she could not rise from the ground. In the evening, when it was time for the animals to have their drink before going to bed, they found the lake quite dry, and they had to make up their minds to be thirsty till the water flowed again and the streams were full. Even then, for some time, the lake was very dirty, and the lion, as king of the beasts, commanded that no one should drink till it was quite clear again. But the little hare, who was fond of having his own way, and was very thirsty besides, stole quietly off when all the rest were asleep in their dens, and crept down to the margin of the lake and drank his fill. Then he smeared the dirty water all over the rabbit's face and paws, so that it might look as if it were he who had been disobeying Big Lion's orders. The next day, as soon as it was light, Big Lion marched straight for the lake, and all the other beasts followed him. He saw at once that the water had been troubled again, and was very angry. "Who has been drinking my water?" said he, and the little hare gave a jump, and, pointing to the rabbit, he answered, "Look there, it must be he. Why, there is mud all over his face and paws." The rabbit, frightened out of his wits, tried to deny the fact, exclaiming, "Oh, no, indeed I never did." But Big Lion would not listen, and commanded them to cane him with a birch rod. Now the little hare was very much pleased with his cleverness in causing the rabbit to be beaten instead of himself, and went about boasting of it. At last one of the other animals overheard him, and called out, little hare, what is that you are saying?" But the little hare hastily replied, "I only asked you to pass me my stick." An hour or two later, thinking that no one was near him, he said to himself again, "It was really I who drank up the water, but I made them think it was the rabbit." But one of the beasts whose ears were longer than the rest caught the words and went to tell Big Lion about it. "Do you hear what the little hare is saying?" So Big Lion sent for the little hare and asked him what he meant by talking like that. The little hare saw that there was no use trying to hide it, so he answered pertly, "It was I who drank the water, but I made them think it was the rabbit." Then he turned and ran as fast as he could, with all the other beasts pursuing him. They were almost up to him when he dashed into a very narrow cleft in the rock, much too small for them to follow. But in his hurry he had left one of his long ears sticking out, which they just managed to seize. But pull as hard as they might, they could not drag him out of the hole, and at last they gave it up and left him, with his ear very much torn and scratched. When the last tail was out of sight, the little hare crept cautiously out, and the first person he met was the rabbit. He had plenty of impudence, so he put a bold face on the matter, and said, "Well, my good rabbit, you see, I have had a beating as well as you." But the rabbit was still sore and sulky, and he did not care to talk, so he answered coldly, "You have treated me very badly. It was really you who drank that water, and you accused me of having done it." "Oh, my good rabbit, never mind that. I've got such a wonderful secret to tell you. Do you know what to do so as to escape death?" "No, I don't." "Well, we must begin by digging a hole." So they dug a hole, and then the little hare said, "The next thing is to make a fire in the hole," and they set to work to collect wood, and lit quite a large fire. When it was burning brightly, the little hare said to the rabbit, "Rabbit, my friend, throw me into the fire. And when you hear my fur crackling, and I call, 'Itchy, itchy,' Then be quick and pull me out." The rabbit did as he was told, and threw the little hare into the fire. But no sooner did the little hare begin to feel the heat of the flames than he took some green bay leaves he had plucked for the purpose and held them in the middle of the fire, where they crackled and made a great noise. Then he called loudly, "Itchy, Itchy! Rabbit, my friend, be quick, be quick! Don't you hear how my skin is crackling?" And the rabbit came in a great hurry and pulled him out. Then the little hare said, "Now it is your turn." And he threw the rabbit in the fire. The moment the rabbit felt the flames, he cried out, "Itchy, Itchy, I am burning. Pull me out quick, my friend." But the little hare only laughed and said, "No, you may stay there. It is your own fault. Why were you such a fool as to let yourself be thrown in? Didn't you know that fire burns?" And in a very few minutes, nothing was left of the rabbit but a few bones. When the fire was quite out, the little hare went and picked up one of these bones and made a flute out of it and sang this song, "Pee, pee, pee. Oh, flute that I love, pee, pee. Rabbits are but little boys. Pee, pee. He would have burned me if he could. Pee, pee. But I burned him." And he crackled finely. When he got tired of going through the world singing this, the little hare went back to his friends and entered the service of Big Lion. One day he said to his master, "Grandfather, shall I show you a splendid way to kill game?" "What is it?" asked Big Lion. "We must dig a ditch, and then you must lie in it and pretend to be dead." Big Lion did as he was told. And when he had lain down, the little hare got up on a wall, blew a trumpet and shouted, "Pee, pee! All you animals come and see, Big Lion is dead, and now peace will be." Directly they heard this, they all came running. The little hare received them and said, "Pass on, this way to the lion." So they all entered into the animal kingdom. Last of all came the monkey with her baby on her back. She approached the ditch and took a blade of grass and tickled Big Lion's nose, and his nostrils moved in spite of his efforts to keep them still. Then the monkey cried, "Come, my baby, climb on my back and let us go. What sort of a dead body is it that can still feel when it is tickled?" And she and her baby went away in a fright. Then the little hare said to the other beasts, "Now shut the gate of the animal kingdom." And it was shut, and great stones were rolled against it. When everything was tight closed, the little hare turned to Big Lion and said, "Now!" And Big Lion bounded out of the ditch and tore the other animals in pieces. But Big Lion kept all the choice bits for himself and only gave away the little scraps that he did not care about eating, and the little hare grew very angry and determined to have his revenge. He had long ago found out that Big Lion was very easily taken in, so he laid his plans accordingly. He said to him, as if the idea had just come into his head, "Grandfather, let us build a hut," and Big Lion consented. And when they had driven the stakes into the ground and had made the walls of the hut, the little hare told Big Lion to climb upon the top while he stayed inside. When he was ready, he called out, "Now, grandfather, begin." And Big Lion passed his rod through the reeds with which the roofs are always covered in that country. The little hare took it and cried, "Now it is my turn to pierce them." And as he spoke, he passed the rod back through the reeds and gave Big Lion's tail a sharp poke. "What is pricking me so?" asked Big Lion. "Oh, just a little branch sticking out. I am going to break it," answered the little hare. But of course he had done it on purpose, as he wanted to fix Big Lion's tail so firmly to the hut that he would not be able to move. In a little while he gave another prick, and Big Lion called again, "What is pricking me so?" This time the little hare said to himself, "He will find out what I am at. I must try some other plan." So he called out, "Grandfather, you had better put your tongue here, so that the branches shall not touch you." Big Lion did as he was bid, and the little hare tied it tightly to the stakes of the wall. Then he went outside and shouted, "Grandfather, you can come down now." And Big Lion tried, but he could not move an inch. Then the little hare began quietly to eat Big Lion's dinner right before his eyes, and paying no attention at all to his growls of rage. When he had quite done, he climbed up on the hut, and, blowing his flute, he chanted, "Pea, pea, pour rain and hail," and directly the sky was full of clouds. The thunder roared, and huge hailstones whitened the roof of the hut. The little hare, who had taken refuge within, called out again, "Big Lion, be quick and come down and dine with me." But there was no answer, not even a growl, for the hailstones had killed Big Lion. The little hare enjoyed himself vastly for some time, living comfortably in the hut, with plenty of food to eat and no trouble at all in getting it. But one day a great wind arose, and flung down the Big Lion's half-dried skin from the roof of the hut. The little hare bounded with terror at the noise, for he thought Big Lion must have come to life again. But on discovering what had happened, he set about cleaning the skin, and propped the mouth open with sticks so that he could get through. So, dressed in Big Lion's skin, the little hare started on his travels. The first visit he paid was to the hyenas, who trembled at the sight of him and whispered to each other, "How shall we escape from this terrible beast?" Meanwhile, the little hare did not trouble himself about them, but just asked where the king of the hyenas lived, and made himself quite at home there. Every morning each hyena thought to himself, "Today he is certain to eat me." But several days went by, and they were all still alive. At length, one evening, the little hare, looking round for something to amuse him, noticed a great pot full of boiling water. So he strolled up to one of the hyenas and said, "Go and get in." The hyena dared not disobey, and in a few minutes was scalded to death. Then the little hare went the round of the village, saying to every hyena he met, "Go and get into the boiling water," so that in a little while there was hardly a male left in the village. One day, all the hyenas that remained alive went out very early into the fields, leaving only one little daughter at home. The little hare, thinking he was all alone, came into the enclosure, and, wishing to feel what it was like to be a hare again, threw off Big Lion's skin, and began to jump and dance, singing, "I am just the little hare, the little hare, the little hare. I am just the little hare who killed the great hyenas." The little hyena gazed at him in surprise, saying to herself, "What? Was it really this tiny beast who put to death all our best people?" When suddenly a gust of wind rustled the reeds that surrounded the enclosure, and the little hare, in a fright, hastily sprang back into Big Lion's skin. When the hyenas returned to their homes, the little hyena said to her father, "Father, our tribe has very nearly been swept away, and all this has been the work of a tiny creature dressed in the lion's skin." But her father answered, "Oh, my dear child, you don't know what you are talking about." She replied, "Yes, father, it is quite true. I saw it with my own eyes." The father did not know what to think, and told one of his friends, who said, "You! Tomorrow we had better keep watch ourselves." And the next day they hid themselves and waited till the little hare came out of the royal hut. He walked gaily towards the enclosure, threw off Big Lion's skin, and sang and danced as before. "I am just the little hare, the little hare, the little hare. I am just the little hare who killed the great hyenas." That night the two hyenas told all the rest, saying, Do you know that we have allowed ourselves to be trampled on by a wretched creature with nothing of the lion about him but his skin? When supper was being cooked, that evening before they all went to bed, the little hare, looking fierce and terrible in Big Lion's skin, said as usual to one of the hyenas, "Go and get into the boiling water." But the hyena never stirred. There was silence for a moment. Then a hyena took a stone and flung it with all his force against the lion's skin. The little hare jumped out through the mouth with a single spring and fled away like lightning, all the hyenas in full pursuit, uttering great cries. As he turned a corner, the little hare cut off both his ears so that they should not know him, and pretended to be working at a grindstone which lay there. The hyenas soon came up to him and said, "Tell me, friend, have you seen the little hare go by?" "No, I have seen no one." "Where can he be?" said the hyenas one to another. "Of course this creature is quite different, and not at all like the little hare." Then they went on their way, but, finding no traces of the little hare, they returned sadly to their village, saying, "To think we should have allowed ourselves to be swept away by a wretched creature like that." The Man Without a Heart. Once upon a time there were 7 brothers who were orphans and had no sister. Therefore they were obliged to do all their own housework. This they did not like at all, so after much deliberation they decided to get married. There were, unfortunately, no young girls to be found in the place where they lived, but the elder brothers agreed to go out into the world and seek for brides, promising to bring back a very pretty wife for the youngest also, if he would meanwhile stay at home and take care of the house. He consented willingly, and the 6 young men set off in good spirits. On their way they came to a small cottage standing quite by itself in a wood, and before the door stood an old man, who accosted the brothers, saying, "Hello, you young fellows! Whither away so fast and cheerily?" "We are going to find bonny brides for ourselves, and one for our youngest brother at home," they replied. "Oh, dear youths," said the old man, "I am terribly lonely here. Pray bring a bride for me also. Only remember, she must be young and pretty." "What does a shriveled old grey thing like that want with a pretty young bride?" thought the brothers, and went on their way. Presently they came to a town where were 7 sisters, as young and as lovely as anyone could wish. Each brother chose one, and the youngest they kept for their brother at home. Then the whole party set out on the return journey, and again their path led through the wood and past the old man's cottage. There he stood before the door and cried, "Oh, you fine fellows, what a charming bride you have brought me." "She is not for you," said the young men. "She is for our youngest brother, as we promised." "What?" said the old man. "Promised? I'll make you eat your promises." And with that he took his magic wand, and, murmuring a charm, he touched both brothers and brides, and immediately they were turned into grey stones. Only the youngest sister he had not bewitched. He took her into the cottage, and from that time she was obliged to keep house for him. She was not very unhappy, but one thought troubled her. What if the old man should die and leave her here alone in the solitary cottage deep in the heart of the wood? She would be as terribly lonely as he had formerly been. One day she told him of her fear. "Don't be anxious," he said. "You need neither fear my death nor desire it, for I have no heart in my breast. However, if I should die, you will find my wand above the door, and with it you can set free your sisters and their lovers. Then you will surely have company enough. Where in all the world do you keep your heart?" "If not in your breast?" asked the girl. "Do you want to know everything?" her husband said. "Well, if you must know, my heart is in the bed cover." When the old man had gone out about his business, his bride passed her time in embroidering beautiful flowers on the bedquilt to make his heart happy. The old man was much amused. He laughed and said to her, "You are a good child, but I was only joking. My heart is really in. Now where is it, dear husband?" "It is in the doorway," he replied. Next day, while he was out, the girl decorated the door with gay feathers and fresh flowers and hung garlands upon it. And on his return, the old fellow asked what it all meant. "I did it to show my love for your heart," said the girl. And again the old man smiled, saying, "You are a dear child, but my heart is not in the doorway." Then the poor young bride was very vexed and said, "Ah, my dear, you really have a heart somewhere. So you may die and leave me all alone." The old man did his best to comfort her by repeating all he had said before, but she begged him afresh to tell her truly where his heart was, and at last he told her. "Far, far from here," said he, "in a lonely spot, stands a great church, as old can be. Its doors are of iron, and round it runs a deep moat spanned by no bridge. Within that church is a bird which flies up and down. It never eats, and never drinks, and never dies. No one can catch it, and while that bird lives, so shall I, for in it is my heart." It made the little bride quite sad to think she could do nothing to show her love for the old man's heart. She used to think about it as she sat all alone during the long days, for her husband was almost always out. One day a young traveller came past the house, and seeing such a pretty girl, he wished her "Good day." She returned his greeting, and as he drew near she asked him whence he came and where he was going. "Alas," sighed the youth, "I am very sorrowful. I had 6 brothers who went away to find brides for themselves and one for me, but they have never come home. So now I am going to look for them." "Oh, good friend," said the girl, "you need go no farther. Come, sit down, eat and drink, and afterwards I'll tell you all about it." She gave him food, and when he had finished his meal, she told him how his brothers had come to the town where she lived with her sisters, how they had each chosen a bride, and, taking herself with them, had started for home. She wept as she told how the others were turned to stone, and how she was kept as the old man's bride. She left out nothing, even telling him the story of her husband's heart. When the young man heard this, he said, "I shall go in search of the bird. It may be that God will help me to find and catch it." "Yes, do go," she said. "It will be a good deed, for then you can set your brothers and my sisters free." Then she hid the young man, for it was now late, and her husband would soon be home. Next morning, when the old man had gone out, she prepared a supply of provisions for her guest, and sent him off on his travels, wishing him good luck and success. He walked on, till he thought it must be time for breakfast, so he opened his knapsack and was delighted to find such a store of good things. "What a feast!" he exclaimed. "Will anyone come and share it?" "Moo!" sounded close behind him, and looking round he saw a great red ox, which said, "I have much pleasure in accepting your kind invitation. I'm delighted to see you. Pray help yourself." "All I have is at your service," said the hospitable youth, and the ox lay down comfortably, licking his lips, and made a hearty meal. "Many thanks to you," said the animal as it rose up. "When you are in danger or necessity, call me, even if only by a thought," and it disappeared among the bushes. The young man packed up all the food that was left, and wandered on till the shortening shadows and his own hunger warned him that it was midday. He laid the cloth on the ground and spread out his provisions, saying at the same time, "Dinner is ready, and anyone who wishes to share it is welcome." Then there was a great rustling in the undergrowth, and out ran a wild boar, grunting. "Umph, umph, umph," someone said dinner was ready. "Was it you? And did you mean me to come?" "By all means. Help yourself to what I have," said the young traveller, and the two enjoyed their meal together. Afterwards the boar got up, saying, "Thank you. When in need you be, you must quickly call for me." And he rolled off. For a long time the youth walked on. By evening he was miles away. He felt hungry again, and, having still some provisions left, thought he had better make ready his supper. When it was all spread out, he cried as before, "Anyone who cares to share my meal is welcome." He heard a sound overhead, like the flapping of wings, and a shadow was cast upon the ground. Then a huge griffin appeared, saying, "I heard someone giving an invitation to eat. Is there anything for me?" "Why not?" said the youth. "Come down and take all you want. There won't be much left after this." So the griffin alighted and ate his fill, saying, as he flew away, "Call me if you need me." What a hurry he was in, the youth said to himself. He might have been able to direct me to the church, for I shall never find it alone. He gathered up his things and started to walk a little farther before resting. He had not gone far when all of a sudden he saw the church. He soon came to it, or rather, to the wide and deep moat which surrounded it without a single bridge by which to cross. It was too late to attempt anything now, and, besides, the poor youth was very tired, so he lay down on the ground and fell fast asleep. Next morning, when he awoke, he began to wish himself over the moat, and the thought occurred to him that if only the red ox were there and thirsty enough to drink up all the water in the moat, he might walk across it dry-shod. Scarcely had the thought crossed his brain before the ox appeared and began to drink up the water. The grateful youth hastened across as soon as the moat was dry, but found it impossible to penetrate the thick walls and strong iron doors of the church. "I believe that big boar would be of more use here than I am," he thought, and lo! At the wish the wild boar came and began to push hard against the wall. He managed to loosen one stone with his tusks, and, having made a beginning, stone after stone was poked out, till he had made quite a large hole, big enough to let a man go through. The young man quickly entered the church, and saw a bird flying about, but he could not catch it. "Oh!" he exclaimed, "if only the griffin were here, he would soon catch it." At these words the griffin appeared, and, seizing the bird, gave it to the youth, who carried it off carefully, while the griffin flew away. The young man hurried home as fast as possible, and reached the cottage before evening. He told his story to the little bride, who, after giving him some food and drink, hid him with his bird beneath the bed. Presently the old man came home and complained of feeling ill. Nothing, he said, would go well with him any more. His heart-bird was caught. The youth under the bed heard this, and thought, "This old fellow has done me no particular harm, but then he has bewitched my brothers and their brides, and has kept my bride for himself, and that is certainly bad enough." So he pinched the bird, and the old man cried, "Ah, I feel death gripping me. Child, I am dying." With these words he fell fainting from his chair. And as the youth, before he knew what he was doing, had squeezed the bird to death, the old man died also. Out crept the young man from under the bed, and the girl took the magic wand which she found where the old man had told her, and, touching the clove-grey stones, transformed them at once into the 6 brothers and their brides. Then there was great joy, and kissing and embracing, and there lay the old man, quite dead, and no magic wand could restore him to life, even had they wished it. After that they all went away and were married, and lived many years happily together. The Merry Wives. There lay 3 houses in a row, in one of which there lived a tailor, in another a carpenter, and in the third a smith. All 3 were married, and their wives were very good friends. They often talked about how stupid their husbands were, but they could never agree as to which of them had the most stupid one. Each one stuck up for her own husband and maintained that it was he. The 3 wives went to church together every Sunday and had a regular good gossip on the way, and when they were coming home from church they always turned into the tavern which lay by the wayside and drank half a pint together. This was at the time when half a pint of brandy cost 3p, so that was just a penny for each of them. But the brandy went up in price, and the taverner said that he must have 4p for the half pint. They were greatly annoyed at this, for there were only the 3 of them to share it, and none of them was willing to pay the extra penny. As they went home from the church that day, they decided to wager with each other as to whose husband was the most stupid, and the one who, on the following Sunday, should be judged to have played her husband the greatest trick, should thereafter go free from paying, and each of the 2 others would give 2p for their Sunday's half pint. Next day, the tailor's wife said to her husband, "I have some girls coming today to help to card my wool. There is a great deal to do, and we must be very busy. I am so annoyed that our watchdog is dead, for in the evening the young fellows will come about to get fun with the girls, and they will get nothing done. If we had only had a fierce watchdog, he would have kept them away." "Yes," said the man, "that would have been a good thing." "Listen, good man," said the wife, "you must just be the watchdog yourself and scare the fellows away from the house." The husband was not very sure about this, although otherwise he was always ready to give in to her. "Oh yes, you will see it will work all right," said the wife. And so, towards evening, she got the tailor dressed up in a shaggy fur coat, tied a black woolen cloth round his head, and chained him up beside the dog's kennel. There he stood and barked and growled at everyone that moved in his neighborhood. The neighbor wives knew all about this, and were greatly amused at it. On the day after this, the carpenter had been out at work and came home quite merry, but as soon as he entered the house his wife clapped her hands together and cried, "My dear, what makes you look like that? You are ill." The carpenter knew nothing about being ill. He only thought that he wanted something to eat, so he sat down at the table and began his dinner. His wife sat straight in front of him with her hands folded and shook her head and looked at him with an anxious air. "You are getting worse, my dear," she said. "You are quite pale now. You have a serious illness about you. I can see it by your looks." The husband now began to grow anxious, and thought that perhaps he was not quite well. "No, indeed," said she. "It's high time that you were in bed." She then got him to lie down, and piled above him all the bedclothes she could find, and gave him various medicines, while he grew worse and worse. "You will never get over it," said she. "I'm afraid you are going to die." "Do you think so?" said the carpenter. "I can well believe it, for I am indeed very poorly." In a little while she said again, "Ah, now I must part with you. Here comes death. Now I must close your eyes." And she did so. The carpenter believed everything that his wife said, and so he believed now that he was dead, and lay still and let her do as she pleased. She got her neighbors summoned, and they helped to lay him in the coffin. It was one of those he himself had made, but his wife had bored holes in it to let him get some air. She made a soft bed under him, and put a coverlet over him, and she folded his hands over his breast, but instead of a flower or a psalm book, she gave him a pint bottle of brandy in his hands. After he had lain for a little, he took a little pull at this, and then another and another, and he thought this did him good, and soon he was sleeping sweetly, and dreaming that he was in heaven. Meanwhile, word had gone round the village that the carpenter was dead and was to be buried next day. It was now the turn of the smith's wife. Her husband was lying sleeping off the effects of a drinking bout. So she pulled off all his clothes and made him black as coal from head to foot, and then let him sleep till far on in the day. The funeral party had already met at the carpenter's and marched off towards the church with the coffin, when the smith's wife came rushing in to her husband. "Gracious man," said she, "you are lying there yet? You are sleeping too long. You know you are going to the funeral." The smith was quite confused. He knew nothing about any funeral. "It's our neighbour, the carpenter," said his wife, "who is to be buried today. They are already halfway to church with him." "All right," said the smith. "Make haste to help me on with my black clothes." "What nonsense," said his wife. "You have them on already. Be off with you now." The smith looked down at his person and saw that he was a good deal blacker than he usually was. So he caught up his hat and ran out after the funeral. This was already close to the church, and the smith wanted to take part in carrying the coffin, like a good neighbour. So he ran with all his might and shouted after them, "Hey, wait a little. Let me get a hold of him." The people turned round and saw the black figure coming, and thought it was the devil himself who wanted to get hold of the carpenter. So they threw down the coffin and took to their heels. The lid sprang off the coffin with a shock, and the carpenter woke up and looked out. He remembered the whole affair. He knew that he was dead and was going to be buried, and recognizing the smith, he said to him in a low voice, "My good neighbour, if I hadn't been dead already, I should have laughed myself to death now to see you coming like this to my funeral." From that time forth, the carpenter's wife drank free of expense every Sunday, for the others had to admit that she had fooled her husband the best. The Princess in the Chest. There were once a king and a queen who lived in a beautiful castle, and had a large and fair and rich and happy land to rule over. From the very first they loved each other greatly, and lived very happily together, but they had no heir. They had been married for 7 years, but had neither son nor daughter, and that was a great grief to both of them. More than once it happened that when the king was in a bad temper, he let it out on the poor queen, and said that here they were now, getting old, and neither they nor the kingdom had an heir, and it was all her fault. This was hard to listen to, and she went and cried and vexed herself. Finally the king said to her one day, "This can't be borne any longer. I go about childless, and it's your fault. I am going on a journey and shall be away for a year. If you have a child when I come back again, all will be well, and I shall love you beyond all measure, and never more say an angry word to you. But if the nest is just as empty when I come home, then I must part with you." After the king had set out on his journey, the queen went about in her loneliness, and sorrowed and vexed herself more than ever. At last her maid said to her one day, "I think that some help could be found, if your majesty would seek it." Then she told about a wise old woman in that country, who had helped many in troubles of the same kind, and could no doubt help the queen as well, if she would send for her. The queen did so, and the wise woman came, and to her she confided her sorrow, that she was childless, and the king and his kingdom had no heir. The wise woman knew help for this. "Out in the king's garden," said she, "under the great oak that stands on the left hand, just as one goes out from the castle, is a little bush, rather brown than green, with hairy leaves and long spikes. On that bush there are just at this moment 3 buds. If your majesty goes out there alone, fasting, before sunrise, and takes the middle one of the 3 buds, and eats it, then in 6 months you will bring a princess into the world. As soon as she is born, she must have a nurse, whom I shall provide, and this nurse must live with the child in a secluded part of the palace. No other person must visit the child. Neither the king nor the queen must see it until it is 14 years old, for that would cause great sorrow and misfortune." The queen rewarded the old woman richly, and next morning, before the sun rose, she was down in the garden, found at once the little bush with the 3 buds, plucked the middle one, and ate it. It was sweet to taste, but afterwards was as bitter as gall. 6 months after this, she brought into the world a little girl. There was a nurse in readiness, whom the wise woman had provided, and preparations were made for her living with the child, quite alone, in a secluded wing of the castle, looking out on the pleasure park. The queen did as the wise woman had told her. She gave up the child immediately, and the nurse took it and lived with it there. When the king came home and heard that a daughter had been born to him, he was, of course, very pleased and happy, and wanted to see her at once. The queen had then to tell him this much of the story, that it had been foretold that it would cause great sorrow and misfortune if either he or she got a sight of the child until it had completed its 14th year. This was a long time to wait. The king longed so much to get a sight of his daughter, and the queen no less than he, but she knew that it was not like other children, for it could speak immediately after it was born, and was as wise as older folk. This the nurse had told her, for with her the queen had a talk now and again, but there was no one who had ever seen the princess. The queen had also seen what the wise woman could do, so she insisted strongly that her warning should be obeyed. The king often lost his patience, and was determined to see his daughter, but the queen always put him off the idea. And so things went on, until the very day before the princess completed her 14th year. The king and the queen were out in the garden then, and the king said, "Now I can't and I won't wait any longer. I must see my daughter at once. A few hours, more or less, can't make any difference." The queen begged him to have patience till the morning. When they had waited so long, they could surely wait a single day more. But the king was quite unreasonable. "No nonsense," said he. "She is just as much mine as yours, and I will see her." And with that, he went straight up to her room. He burst the door open and pushed aside the nurse, who tried to stop him. And there he saw his daughter. She was the loveliest young princess, red and white, like milk and blood, with clear blue eyes and golden hair, but right in the middle of her forehead there was a little tuft of brown hair. The princess went to meet her father, fell on his neck and kissed him, but with that she said, "Oh, father, father, what have you done now?" "Tomorrow I must die, and you must choose one of 3 things. Either the land must be smitten with the black pestilence, or you must have a long and bloody war. Or you must, as soon as I am dead, lay me in a plain wooden chest and set it in the church, and for a whole year place a sentinel beside it every night." The king was frightened indeed, and thought she was raving, but in order to please her, he said, "Well, of these 3 things I shall choose the last. If you die, I shall lay you at once in a plain wooden chest, and have it set in the church, and every night I shall place a sentinel beside it. But you shall not die, even if you are ill now." He immediately summoned all the best doctors in the country, and they came with all their prescriptions and their medicine bottles, but next day the princess was stiff and cold in death. All the doctors could certify to that, and they all put their names to this and appended their seals, and then they had done all they could. The king kept his promise, The princess's body was lain the same day in a plain wooden chest and set in the chapel of the castle, and on that night and every night after it, a sentinel was posted in the church to keep watch over the chest. The first morning when they came to let the sentinel out, there was no sentinel there. They thought he had just got frightened and run away, and next evening a new one was posted in the church. In the morning he was also gone. So it went every night. When they came in the morning to let the sentinel out, there was no one there, and it was impossible to discover which way he had gone if he had run away. And what should they run away for, every one of them, so that nothing more was overheard or seen of them? From the hour that they were set on guard beside the princess's chest, it became now a general belief that the princess's ghost walked and ate up all those who were to guard her chest. And very soon there was no one left who would be placed on this duty, and the king's soldiers deserted the service, before their turn came to be her bodyguard. The king then promised a large reward to the soldier who would volunteer for the post. This did for some time, as there were found a few reckless fellows who wished to earn this good payment. But they never got it, for in the morning they too had disappeared, like the rest. So it had gone on for something like a whole year. Every night a sentinel had been placed beside the chest, either by compulsion or of his own free will. But not a single one of the sentinels was to be seen, either on the following day or any time thereafter. And so it had also gone with one, on the night before a certain day, when a merry young smith came wandering to the town where the king's castle stood. It was the capital of the country, and people of every king came to it to get work. This smith, whose name was Christian, had come for that same purpose. There was no work for him in the place he belonged to, and he wanted now to seek a place in the capital. There he entered an inn, where he sat down in the public room and got something to eat. Some under-officers were sitting there, who were out to try to get someone enlisted to stand sentry. They had to go in this way, day after day, and hitherto they had always succeeded in finding one or other reckless fellow. But on this day they had, as yet, found no one. It was too well known how all the sentinels disappeared who were set on that post, and all that they had got hold of had refused with thanks. These sat down beside Christian and ordered drinks, and drank along with him. Now Christian was a merry fellow who liked good company. He could both drink and sing, and talk and boast as well when he got a little drop in his head. He told these under-officers that he was one of that kind of folk who never are afraid of anything. Then he was just the kind of man they liked, said they, and he might easily earn a good penny before he was a day older, for the king paid $100 to anyone who would stand as sentinel in the church all night beside his daughter's chest. Christian was not afraid of that. He wasn't afraid of anything. So they drank another bottle of wine on this, and Christian went with them up to the colonel, where he was put into uniform with musket and all the rest, and was then shut up in the church to stand as sentinel that night. It was 8 o'clock when he took up his post, and for the first hour he was quite proud of his courage. During the second hour he was well pleased with the large reward that he would get, but in the third hour, when it was getting near 11, the effects of the wine passed off, and he began to get uncomfortable, for he had heard about this post, that no one had ever escaped alive from it, so far as was known. But neither did anyone know what had become of all the sentinels. The thought of this ran in his head so much, after the wine was out of it, that he searched about everywhere for a way of escape. And finally, at 11 o'clock, he found a little postern in the steeple, which was not locked, and out at this he crept, intending to run away. At the same moment as he put his foot outside the church door, he saw standing before him a little man who said, "Good evening, Christian. Where are you going?" With that he felt as if he were rooted to the spot and could not move. "Nowhere," said he. "Oh, yes," said the little man. "You were just about to run away, but you have taken upon you to stand sentinel in the church tonight, and there you must stay." Christian said very humbly that he dared not, and therefore wanted to get away, and begged to be let go. "No," said the little one, "you must remain at your post, but I shall give you a piece of good advice. You shall go up into the pulpit and remain standing there. You need never mind what you see or hear. It will not be able to do you any harm. If you remain in your place until you hear the lid of the chest slam down again behind the dead, then all danger is past, and you can go about the church wherever you please." The little man then pushed him in at the door again, and locked it after him. Christian made haste to get up into the pulpit, and stood there, without noticing anything, until the clock struck 12. Then the lid of the princess's chest sprang up, and out of it there came something like the princess, dressed as you see in the picture. It shrieked and howled, "Sentry, where are you? Sentry, where are you? If you don't come, you shall get the most cruel death anyone had ever got." It went all round the church, and when it finally caught sight of the smith, up in the pulpit it came rushing thither and mounted the steps. But it could not get up the whole way, and for all that it stretched and strained. It could not touch Christian, who meanwhile stood and trembled up in the pulpit. When the clock struck 1, the appearance had to go back into the chest again, and Christian heard the lid slam after it. After this there was dead silence in the church. He lay down where he was and fell asleep, and did not awake before it was bright daylight, and he heard steps outside and the noise of the key being put into the lock. Then he came down from the pulpit and stood with his musket in front of the princess's chest. It was the colonel himself who came with the patrol, and he was not a little surprised when he found the recruit safe and sound. He wanted to have a report, but Christian would give him none. So he took him straight up to the king and announced for the first time that here was the sentinel who had stood guard in the church overnight. The king immediately got out of bed and laid the $100 for him on the table, and then wanted to question him. "Have you seen anything?" said he. "Have you seen my daughter?" "I have stood at my post," said the young smith, "and that is quite enough. I undertook nothing more." He was not sure whether he dared tell what he had seen and heard, and besides he was also a little conceited, because he had done what no other man had been able to do or had had courage for. The king professed to be quite satisfied, and asked him whether he would engage himself to stand on guard again the following night. "No, thank you," said Christian. "I will have no more of that." "As you please," said the king. "You have behaved like a brave fellow, and now you shall have your breakfast. You must be needing something to strengthen you after that turn." The king had breakfast laid for him, and sat down at the table with him in person. He kept constantly filling his glass for him and praising him and drinking his health. Christian needed no pressing, but did full justice both to the food and drink, and not least to the latter. Finally he grew bold, and said that if the king would give him $200 for it, he was his man to stand sentry next night as well. When this was arranged, Christian bade him "Good day," and went down among the guards, and then out into the town along with other soldiers and under-officers. He had his pocket full of money, and treated them, and drank with them, and boasted, and made game of the good-for-nothings who were afraid to stand on guard, because they were frightened that the dead princess would eat them. See whether she had eaten him. So the day passed in mirth and glee. But when 8 o'clock came, Christian was again shut up in the church, all alone. Before he had been there 2 hours, he got tired of it and thought only of getting away. He found a little door behind the altar which was not locked, and at 10 o'clock he slipped out at it and took to his heels and made for the beach. He had got halfway thither when all at once the same little man stood in front of him and said, "Good evening, Christian. Where are you going?" "I've leave to go where I please," said the smith. But at the same time he noticed that he could not move a foot. "No, you have undertaken to keep guard tonight as well," said the little man, "and you must attend to that." He then took hold of him, and however unwilling he was, Christian had to go with him right back to the same little door that he had crept out at. When they got there, the little man said to him, "Go in front of the altar now, and take in your hand the book that is lying there. There you shall stay till you hear the lid of the chest slam down over the dead. In that way you will come to no harm." With that, the little man shoved him in at the door and locked it. Christian then immediately went in front of the altar and took the book in his hand, and stood thus until the clock struck 12, and the appearance sprang out of the chest. "Sentry, where are you? Sentry, where are you?" it shrieked, and then rushed to the pulpit and right up into it. But there was no one there that night. Then it howled and shrieked again, "My father has set no sentry in. War and pests this night begin." At the same moment it noticed the smith standing in front of the altar, and came rushing towards him. "Are you there?" it screamed. "Now I'll catch you." But it could not come up over the step in front of the altar, and there it continued to howl and scream and threaten, until the clock struck 1, when it had to go into the chest again, and Christian heard the lid slam above it. That night, however, it had not the same appearance as on the previous one. It was less ugly. When all was quiet in the church, the smith lay down before the altar and slept calmly till the following morning, when the colonel came to fetch him. He was taken up to the king again, and things went on as the day before. He got his money, but would give no explanation whether he had seen the king's daughter, and he would not take the post again, he said. But after he had got a good breakfast and tasted well of the king's wines, he undertook to go on guard again the 3rd night. But he would not do it for less than the half of the kingdom, he said, for it was a dangerous post, and the king had to agree, and promise him this. The remainder of the day went like the previous one. He played the boastful soldier and the merry smith, and he had comrades and boon companions in plenty. At 8 o'clock he had to put on his uniform again, and was shut up in the church. He had not been there for an hour before he had come to his senses, and thought, "It's best to stop now, while the game is going well." The 3rd night, he was sure, would be the worst. He had been drunk when he promised it, and the half of the kingdom, the king could never have been in earnest about that. So he decided to leave without waiting so long as on the previous nights. In that way he would escape the little man who had watched him before. All the doors and posterns were locked, but he finally, though of creeping up to a window and opening that, and as the clock struck 9, he crept out there. It was fairly high in the wall, but he got to the ground with no bones broken and started to run. He got down to the shore without meeting anyone, and there he got into a boat and pushed off from land. He laughed immensely to himself at the thought of how cleverly he had managed and how he had cheated the little man. Just then he heard a voice from the shore. "Good evening, Christian. Where are you going?" He gave no answer. "Tonight your legs will be too short," he thought, and pulled at the oars. But he then felt something lay hold of the boat and drag it straight into shore. For all that he sat and struggled with the oars, the man then laid hold of him and said, "You must remain at your post as you have promised." And whether he liked it or not, Christian had just to go back with him the whole way to the church. He could never get in at that window again, Christian said, It was far too high up. "You must go in there, and you shall go in there," said the little man, and with that he lifted him up onto the window-sill. Then he said to him, "Notice well now what you have to do. This evening you must stretch yourself out on the left-hand side of her chest. The lid opens to the right, and she comes out to the left. When she has got out of the chest and passed over you, you must get into it and lie there, and that in a hurry, without her seeing you. There you must remain lying until day dawns, and whether she threatens you or entreats you, you must not come out of it or give her any answer. Then she has no power over you, and both you and she are freed." The smith then had to go in at the window, just as he came out, and went and laid himself all his length on the left side of the princess's chest, close up to it, and there he lay stiff as a rock until the clock struck 12. Then the lid sprang up to the right, and the princess came out straight over him, and rushed round the church, howling and shrieking, "Sentry, where are you? Sentry, where are you?" She went towards the altar, and right up to it, but there was no one there. Then she screamed again, "My father has set no sentry in, war and pest will now begin." Then she went round the whole church, both up and down, sighing and weeping. "My father has set no sentry in, war and pest will now begin." Then she went away again, and at the same moment the clock in the tower struck 1. Then the smith heard in the church a soft music, which grew louder and louder, and soon filled the whole building. He heard also a multitude of footsteps, as if the church was being filled with people. He heard the priest go through the service in front of the altar, and there was singing more beautiful than he had ever heard before. Then he also heard the priest offer up a prayer of thanksgiving because the land had been freed from war and pestilence and from all misfortune, and the king's daughter delivered from the evil one. Many voices joined in, and a hymn of praise was sung. Then he heard the priest again, and heard his own name and that of the princess, and thought that he was being wedded to her. The church was packed full, but he could see nothing. Then he heard again the many footsteps as old folk leaving the church, while the music sounded fainter and fainter, until it altogether died away. When it was silent, the light of day began to break in through the windows. The smith sprang up out of the chest and fell on his knees and thanked God. The church was empty, but up in front of the altar lay the princess, white and red, like a human being, but sobbing and crying and shaking with cold in her white shroud. The smith took his sentry coat and wrapped it round her. Then she dried her tears and took his hand and thanked him, and said that he had now freed her from all the sorcery that had been in her from her birth, and which had come over her again when her father broke the command against seeing her until she had completed her 14th year. She said further that if he who had delivered her would take her in marriage, she would be his. If not, she would go into a nunnery, and he could marry no other as long as she lived, for he was wedded to her with the service of the dead which he had heard. She was now the most beautiful young princess that anyone could wish to see, and he was now lord of half the kingdom, which had been promised him for standing on guard the third nigh. So they agreed that they would have each other, and love each other all their days. With the first sunbeam the watch came and opened the church, and not only was the colonel there, but the king in person, come to see what had happened to the sentinel. He found them both sitting hand in hand on the step in front of the altar, and immediately knew his daughter again, and took her in his arms, thanking God and her deliverer. He made no objections to what they had arranged, and so Christian the smith held his wedding with the princess, and got half the kingdom at once, and the whole of it when the king died. As for the other sentries, with so many doors and windows open, no doubt they had run away and gone into the Prussian service. And as for what Christian said he saw, he had been drinking more wine than was good for him. The shirt collar. There was once a fine gentleman whose entire worldly possessions consisted of a bootjack and a hairbrush, but he had the most beautiful shirt collar in the world, and it is about this that we are going to hear a story. The shirt collar was so old that he began to think about marrying, and it happened one day that he and a garter came into the washtub together. "Hulloa," said the shirt collar. "Never before have I seen anything so slim and delicate, so elegant and pretty. May I be permitted to ask your name?" "I shan't tell you," said the garter. "Where is the place of your abode?" asked the shirt collar. But the garter was of a bashful disposition, and did not think it proper to answer. "Perhaps you are a girdle?" said the shirt collar, "an undergirdle? For I see that you are for use as well as for ornament." "My pretty miss, you ought not to speak to me," said the garter. "I'm sure I haven't given you any encouragement." "When anyone is as beautiful as you," said the shirt collar, "is not that encouragement enough?" "Go away. Don't come so close," said the garter. "You seem to be a gentleman." "So I am, and a very fine one too," said the shirt collar. "I possess a bootjack and a hairbrush." That was not true. It was his master who owned these things, but he was a terrible boaster. "Don't come so close," said the garter. "I'm not accustomed to such treatment. What affectation!" said the shirt collar. And then they were taken out of the washtub, starched, and hung on a chair in the sun to dry, and then laid on the ironing board. Then came the glowing iron. "Mistress Widow," said the shirt collar, "dear Mistress Widow, I am becoming another man. All my creases are coming out. You are burning a hole in me. Ah! Stop, I implore you, you rag," said the iron, travelling proudly over the shirt collar, for it thought it was a steam engine and ought to be at the station drawing trucks. "Rag," it said. The shirt collar was rather frayed out at the edge, so the scissors came to cut off the threads. "Oh," said the shirt collar, "you must be a dancer. How high you can kick! That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. No man can imitate you." "I know that," said the scissors. "You ought to be a duchess," said the shirt collar. "My worldly possessions consist of a fine gentleman, a bootjack, and a hairbrush. If only I had a duchy." "What? He wants to marry me," said the scissors, and she was so angry that she gave the collar a sharp snip, so that it had to be cast aside as good for nothing. "Well, I shall have to propose to the hairbrush," thought the shirt collar. "It is really wonderful what fine hair you have, madam. Have you never thought of marrying?" "Yes." "That I have," answered the hairbrush. "I'm engaged to the bootjack." "Engaged!" exclaimed the shirt collar. And now there was no one he could marry, so he took to despising matrimony. Time passed, and the shirt collar came in a rag bag to the paper mill. There was a large assortment of rags, the fine ones in one heap and the coarse ones in another, as they should be. They had all much to tell, but no one more than the shirt collar, for he was a hopeless braggart. "I have had a terrible number of love affairs," he said. "They give me no peace. I was such a fine gentleman, so stiff with starch. I had a bootjack and a hairbrush, which I never used. You should just have seen me then. Never shall I forget my first love. She was a girdle, so delicate and soft and pretty. She threw herself into a washtub for my sake. Then there was a widow who glowed with love for me, but I left her alone till she became black. Then there was the dancer who inflicted the wound which has caused me to be here now. She was very violent, My own hairbrush was in love with me and lost all her hair in consequence. Yes, I have experienced much in that line, but I grieve most of all for the garter, I mean the girdle, who threw herself into a wash-tub. I had much on my conscience. It is high time for me to become white paper. And so he did. He became white paper, the very paper on which this story is printed. And that was because he had boasted so terribly about things which were not true. We should take this to heart, so that it may not happen to us, for we cannot indeed tell if we may not some day come to the rag bag and be made into white paper, on which will be printed our whole history, even the most secret parts, so that we too go about the world relating it like the shirt collar. The slaying of the tanuki. Near a big river, and between two high mountains, a man and his wife lived in a cottage a long, long time ago. A dense forest lay all round the cottage, and there was hardly a path or a tree in the whole wood that was not familiar to the peasant from his boyhood. In one of his wanderings he had made friends with a hare, and many an hour the two passed together, when the man was resting by the roadside eating his dinner. Now this strange friendship was observed by the tanuki, a wicked, quarrelsome beast who hated the peasant and was never tired of doing him an ill turn. Again and again he had crept to the hut, and finding some choice morsel put away for the little hare, had either eaten it if he thought it nice, or trampled it to pieces so that no one else should get it, and at last the peasant lost patience, and made up his mind he would have the tanuki's blood. So for many days the man lay hidden, waiting for the tanuki to come by, and when one morning he marched up the road thinking of nothing but the dinner he was going to steal, the peasant threw himself upon him and bound his forelegs tightly, so that he could not move. Then he dragged his enemy joyfully to the house, feeling that at length he had got the better of the mischievous beast which had done him so many ill turns. "He shall pay for them with his skin," he said to his wife. "We will first kill him and then cook him." So saying, he hanged the tanuki head downwards to a beam, and went out to gather wood for a fire. Meanwhile the old woman was standing at the mortar, pounding the rice that was to serve them for the week, with a pestle that made her arms ache with its weight. Suddenly she heard something whining and weeping in the corner, and, stopping her work, she looked round to see what it was. That was all that the rascal wanted, and he put on directly his most humble air, and begged the woman in his softest voice to loosen his bonds, which were hurting him sorely. She was filled with pity for him, but did not dare to set him free, as she knew that her husband would be very angry. The tanuki, however, did not despair, and seeing that her heart was softened, began his prayers anew. He only asked to have his bonds taken from him, he said. He would give his word not to attempt to escape, and if he was once set free, he could soon pound her rice for her. "Then you can have a little rest," he went on, "for rice pounding is very tiring work, and not at all fit for weak women." These last words melted the good woman completely, and she unfastened the bonds that held him. Poor foolish creature! In one moment the tanuki had seized her, stripped off all her clothes, and popped her in the mortar. In a few minutes more she was pounded as fine as the rice. And not content with that, the tanuki placed a pot on the hearth and made ready to cook the peasant a dinner from the flesh of his own wife. When everything was complete, he looked out of the door and saw the old man coming from the forest, carrying a large bundle of wood. Quick as lightning, the tanuki not only put on the woman's clothes, but, as he was a magician, assumed her form as well. Then he took the wood, kindled the fire, and very soon set a large dinner before the old man, who was very hungry, and had forgotten for the moment all about his enemy. But when the tanuki saw that he had eaten his fill and would be thinking about his prisoner, he hastily shook off the clothes behind a door and took his own shape. Then he said to the peasant, "You are a nice sort of person to seize animals and to talk of killing them. You are caught in your own net. It is your own wife that you have eaten, and if you want to find her bones, you have only to look under the floor." With these words, he turned and made for the forest. The old peasant grew cold with horror as he listened, and seemed frozen to the place where he stood. When he had recovered himself a little, he collected the bones of his dead wife, buried them in the garden, and swore over the grave to be avenged on the tanuki. After everything was done, he sat himself down in his lonely cottage and wept bitterly. And the bitterest thought of all was that he would never be able to forget that he had eaten his own wife. While he was thus weeping and wailing, his friend the hare passed by and, hearing the noise, pricked up his ears and soon recognized the old man's voice. He wondered what had happened, and put his head in at the door and asked if anything was the matter. With tears and groans, the peasant told him the whole dreadful story, and the hare, filled with anger and compassion, comforted him as best he could and promised to help him in his revenge. "The false knave shall not go unpunished," said he. So the first thing he did was to search the house for materials to make an ointment, which he sprinkled plentifully with pepper and then put in his pocket. Next he took a hatchet, bade farewell to the old man, and departed to the forest. He bent his steps to the dwelling of the tanuki and knocked at the door. The tanuki, who had no cause to suspect the hare, was greatly pleased to see him, for he noticed the hatchet at once, and began to lay plots how to get hold of it. To do this, he thought he had better offer to accompany the hare, which was exactly what the hare wished and expected, for he knew all the tanuki's cunning and understood his little ways. So he accepted the rascal's company with joy, and made himself very pleasant as they strolled along. When they were wandering in this manner through the forest, the hare carelessly raised his hatchet in passing, and cut down some thick boughs that were hanging over the path. But at length, after cutting down a good big tree, which cost him many hard blows, he declared that it was too heavy for him to carry home, and he must just leave it where it was. This delighted the greedy tanuki, who said that there would be no wait for him, so they collected the large branches, which the hare bound tightly on his back. Then he trotted gaily to the house, the hare following after with his lighter bundle. By this time the hare had decided what he would do, and as soon as they arrived, he quietly set on fire the wood on the back of the tanuki. The tanuki, who was busy with something else, observed nothing, and only called out to ask what was the meaning of the crackling that he heard. "It is just the rattle of the stones which are rolling down the side of the mountain," the hare said, and the tanuki was content, and made no further remarks, never noticing that the noise really sprang from the burning boughs on his back until his fur was in flames, and it was almost too late to put it out. Shrieking with pain, he let fall the burning wood from his back and stamped and howled with agony. But the hare comforted him and told him that he always carried with him an excellent plaster in case of need, which would bring him instant relief, and taking out his ointment, he spread it on a leaf of bamboo and laid it on the wound. No sooner did it touch him than the tanuki leapt yelling into the air, and the hare laughed, and ran to tell his friend the peasant what a trick he had played on their enemy. But the old man shook his head sadly, for he knew that the villain was only crushed for the moment, and that he would shortly be revenging himself upon them. No, the only way ever to get any peace and quiet was to render the tanuki harmless forever. Long did the old man and the hare puzzle together how this was to be done, and at last they decided that they would make 2 boats, a small one of wood and a large one of clay. Then they fell to work at once, and when the boats were ready and properly painted, The hare went to the tanuki, who was still very ill, and invited him to a great fish-catching. The tanuki was still feeling angry with the hare about the trick he had played him, but he was weak and very hungry, so he gladly accepted the proposal, and accompanied the hare to the bank of the river, where the two boats were moored, rocked by the waves. They both looked exactly alike, and the tanuki only saw that one was bigger than the other, and would hold more fish, so he sprang into the large one, while the hare climbed into the one which was made of wood. They loosened their moorings and made for the middle of the stream, and when they were at some distance from the bank, the hare took his oar and struck such a heavy blow at the other boat that it broke in two. The tanuki fell straight into the water and was held there by the hare till he was quite dead. Then he put the body in his boat and rowed to land, and told the old man that his enemy was dead at last. And the old man rejoiced that his wife was avenged, and he took the hare into his house, and they lived together all their days in peace and quietness upon the mountain. The Snowman. How astonishingly cold it is! My body is cracking all over, said the Snowman. The wind is really cutting one's very life out. And how that fiery thing up there glares! He meant the sun, which was just setting. It shan't make me blink, though, and I shall keep quite cool and collected. Instead of eyes, he had two large, three-cornered pieces of slate in his head. His mouth consisted of an old rake, so that he had teeth as well. He was born amidst the shouts and laughter of the boys, and greeted by the jingling bells and cracking whips of the sledges. The sun went down, the full moon rose, large, round, clear, and beautiful, in the dark blue sky. "There it is again, on the other side," said the Snowman, by which he meant the sun was appearing again. "I have become quite accustomed to its glaring. I hope it will hang there and shine, so that I may be able to see myself. I wish I knew, though, how one ought to see about changing one's position. I should very much like to move about. If I only could, I would glide up and down the ice there, as I saw the boys doing, but somehow or other I don't know how to run." "Bow, wow!" barked the old yard dog. He was rather hoarse and couldn't bark very well. His hoarseness came on when he was a house dog and used to lie in front of the stove. The sun will soon teach you to run. I saw that last winter with your predecessor, and farther back still with his predecessors. They have all run away." "I don't understand you, my friend," said the Snowman. "That thing up there is to teach me to run?" He meant the moon. "Well, it certainly did run just now, for I saw it quite plainly over there, and now here it is on this side." "You know nothing at all about it," said the yard dog. "Why, you have only just been made. The thing you see there is the moon. The other thing you saw going down the other side was the sun. He will come up again tomorrow morning, and will soon teach you how to run away down the gutter. The weather is going to change. I feel it already by the pain in my left hind leg. The weather is certainly going to change." "I can't understand him," said the Snowman, "but I have an idea that he is speaking of something unpleasant. That thing that glares so, and then disappears. The sun, as he calls it, is not my friend. I know that by instinct." "Bow, wow!" barked the yard dog, and walked 3 times round himself, and then crept into his kennel to sleep. The weather really did change. Towards morning a dense damp fog lay over the whole neighbourhood. Later on came an icy wind, which sent the frost packing. But when the sun rose, it was a glorious sight. The trees and shrubs were covered with rime, and looked like a wood of coral, and every branch was thick with long white blossoms. The most delicate twigs, which are lost among the foliage in summer-time, came now into prominence, and it was like a spider's web of glistening white. The lady birches waved in the wind, and when the sun shone, everything glittered and sparkled as if it was sprinkled with diamond dust, and great diamonds were lying on the snowy carpet. "Isn't it wonderful?" exclaimed a girl who was walking with a young man in the garden. They stopped near the snowman and looked at the glistening trees. "Summer cannot show a more beautiful sight," she said with her eyes shining. "And one can't get a fellow like this in summer either," said the young man, pointing to the snowman. "He's a beauty!" The girl laughed and nodded to the snowman, and then they both danced away over the snow. "Who were those two?" asked the snowman of the yard dog. "You have been in this yard longer than I have. Do you know who they are?" "Do I know them indeed?" answered the yard dog. "She has often stroked me, and he has given me bones. I don't bite either of them." "But what are they?" asked the snowman. "Lovers," replied the yard dog. "They will go into one kennel and gnaw the same bone." "Are they the same kind of beings that we are?" asked the snowman. "They are our masters," answered the yard dog. "Really, people who have only been in the world one day know very little. That's the conclusion I have come to. Now I have age and wisdom. I know everyone in the house, and I can remember a time when I was not lying here in a cold kennel." "Oh, wow!" "The cold is splendid," said the snowman. "Tell me some more, but don't rattle your chain so. It makes me crack." "Bow, wow!" barked the yard dog. "They used to say I was a pretty little fellow. Then I lay in a velvet-covered chair in my master's house. My mistress used to nurse me, and kiss and fondle me, and call me her dear, sweet little Alice. But by and by I grew too big, and I was given to the housekeeper, and I went into the kitchen. You can see into it from where you are standing. You can look at the room in which I was master, for so I was when I was with the housekeeper. Of course it was a smaller place than upstairs, but it was more comfortable, for I wasn't chased about and teased by the children as I had been before. My food was just as good, or even better. I had my own pillow, and there was a stove there, which at this time of year is the most beautiful thing in the world. I used to creep right under that stove. Ah me! I often dream of that stove still." "Bow, wow! Is a stove so beautiful?" asked the snowman. "Is it anything like me?" "It is just the opposite of you. It is coal-black, and has a long neck with a brass pipe. It eats firewood, so that fire spouts out of its mouth. One has to keep close beside it. Quite underneath is the nicest of all. You can see it through the window from where you are standing." And the snowman looked in that direction and saw a smooth, polished object with a brass pipe. The flicker from the fire reached him across the snow. The snowman felt wonderfully happy, and a feeling came over him which he could not express. But all those who are not snow men know about it. "Why did you leave her?" asked the snowman. He had a feeling that such a being must be a lady. How could you leave such a place? "I had to," said the yard dog. "They turned me out of doors and chained me up here. I had bitten the youngest boy in the leg because he took away the bone I was gnawing. A bone for a bone, I thought. But they were very angry, and from that time I have been chained here, and I have lost my voice. Don't you hear how hoarse I am? Bow wow! I can't speak like other dogs. Bow wow!" That was the end of happiness. The snowman, however, was not listening to him any more. He was looking into the room where the housekeeper lived, where the stove stood on its 4 iron legs and seemed to be just the same size as the snowman. "How? Something is cracking inside me," he said. "Shall I never be able to get in there? It is certainly a very innocent wish, and our innocent wishes ought to be fulfilled." I must get there and lean against the stove if I have to break the window first." "You will never get inside there," said the yard dog, "and if you were to reach the stove you would disappear. Bow, wow!" "I'm as good as gone already," answered the snowman. "I believe I'm breaking up." The whole day the snowman looked through the window. Towards dusk the room grew still more inviting. The stove gave out a mild light, not at all like the moon or even the sun, no, as only a stove can shine when it has something to feed upon. When the door of the room was open, it flared up. This was one of its peculiarities. It flickered quite red upon the snowman's white face. "I can't stand it any longer," he said. "How beautiful it looks, with its tongue stretched out like that." It was a long night, but the snowman did not find it so. There he stood, wrapped in his pleasant thoughts, and they froze so that he cracked. Next morning the panes of the kitchen window were covered with ice, and the most beautiful ice flowers that even a snowman could desire. Only they blotted out the stove. The window would not open. He couldn't see the stove, which he thought was such a lovely lady. There was a cracking and cracking inside him, and all around there was just such a frost as a snowman would delight in. But this snowman was different. How could he feel happy? "Yours is a bad illness for a snowman," said the yard dog. "I also suffered from it, but I have got over it." "Bow, wow," he barked. "The weather is going to change," he added. The weather did change. There came a thaw. When this set in the snowman set off, he did not say anything, and he did not complain, and those are bad signs. One morning he broke up altogether, and lo! where he had stood there remained a broomstick standing upright, round which the boys had built him. "Ah, now I understand why he loved the stove," said the yard dog. "That is the raker they used to clean out the stove. The snowman had a stove raker in his body. That's what was the matter with him. And now it's all over with him. Bow, wow!" And before long it was all over with the winter too. "Bow, wow!" barked the horse yard dog. But the young girls sang, "Woods, your bright green garments don. Willows, your woolly gloves put on. Lark and cuckoo daily sing, February has brought the spring. My heart joins in your song so sweet. Come out, dear sun, the world to greet." And no one thought of the snowman. The Snow Queen. There was once a dreadfully wicked hobgoblin. One day he was in capital spirits because he had made a looking-glass which reflected everything that was good and beautiful in such a way that it dwindled almost to nothing, but anything that was bad and ugly stood out very clearly and looked much worse. The most beautiful landscapes looked like boiled spinach, and the best people looked repulsive or seemed to stand on their heads with no bodies. Their faces were so changed that they could not be recognized, and if anyone had a freckle, you might be sure it would be spread over the nose and mouth. "That was the best part of it," said the hobgoblin. But one day the looking-glass was dropped, and it broke into 1,000,000 billion and more pieces. And now came the greatest misfortune of all, for each of the pieces was hardly as large as a grain of sand, and they flew about all over the world. And if anyone had a bit in his eye, there it stayed, and then he would see everything awry, or else could only see the bad sides of a case. For every tiny splinter of the glass possessed the same power that the whole glass had. Some people got a splinter in their hearts, and that was dreadful, for then it began to turn into a lump of ice. The hobgoblin laughed till his sides ached, but still the tiny bits of glass flew about, and now we will hear all about it. In a large town, where there were so many people and houses that there was not room enough for everybody to have gardens, lived 2 poor children. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other just as much as if they were. Their parents lived opposite one another in 2 attics, and out on the leads they had put 2 boxes filled with flowers. There were sweet peas in it, and 2 rose trees which grow beautifully, and in summer the 2 children were allowed to take their little chairs and sit out under the roses. Then they had splendid games. In the winter they could not do this, but then they put hot pennies against the frozen window panes and made round holes to look at each other through. His name was Kay, and hers was Gerda. Outside it was snowing fast. "Those are the white bees swarming," said the old grandmother. "Have they also a queen bee?" asked the little boy, for he knew that the real bees have one. "To be sure," said the grandmother. "She flies wherever they swarm the thickest. She is larger than any of them, and never stays upon the earth, but flies again up into the black clouds. Often, at midnight, she flies through the streets and peeps in at all the windows, and then they freeze in such pretty patterns and look like flowers." "Yes, we have seen that," said both children. They knew that it was true. "Can the Snow Queen come in here?" asked the little girl. "Just let her," cried the boy. "I would put her on the stove and melt her." But the grandmother stroked his hair and told some more stories. In the evening, when little Kay was going to bed, he jumped on the chair by the window and looked through the little hole. A few snowflakes were falling outside, and one of the largest, lay on the edge of one of the window boxes. The snowflake grew larger and larger till it took the form of a maiden dressed in finest white gauze. She was so beautiful and dainty, but all of ice, hard, bright ice. Still, she was alive. Her eyes glittered like 2 clear stars, but there was no rest or peace in them. She nodded at the window and beckoned with her hand. The little boy was frightened and sprang down from the chair. It seemed as if a great white bird had flown past the window. The next day there was a harder frost than before. Then came the spring, then the summer, when the roses grew and smelt more beautifully than ever. Kay and Gerda were looking at one of their picture books. The clock in the great church tower had just struck 5 when Kay exclaimed, "Oh, something has stung my heart, and I've got something in my eye." The little girl threw her arms round his neck. He winked hard with both his eyes. No, she could see nothing in them. "I think it is gone now," said he. But it had not gone. It was one of the tiny splinters of the glass of the magic mirror which we have heard about, that turned everything great and good reflected in it small and ugly. And poor Kay had also a splinter in his heart, and it began to change into a lump of ice. It did not hurt him at all, but the splinter was there all the same. "Why are you crying?" he asked. "It makes you look so ugly." "There's nothing the matter with me. Just look. That rose is all slug-eaten, and this one is stunted. What ugly roses they are!" And he began to pull them to pieces. "Kay, what are you doing?" cried the little girl. And when he saw how frightened she was, he pulled off another rose and ran in at his window away from dear little Gerda. When she came later on with the picture book, he said that it was only fit for babies, and when his grandmother told them stories, he was always interrupting with, "But—" and then he would get behind her and put on her spectacles and speak just as she did. This he did very well, and everybody laughed. Very soon he could imitate the way all the people in the street walked and talked. His games were now quite different. On a winter's day he would take a burning glass and hold it out on his blue coat and let the snowflakes fall on it. "Look in the glass, Gerda. Just see how regular they are. They are much more interesting than real flowers. Each is perfect. They are all made according to rule. If only they did not melt." One morning, Kay came out with his warm gloves on, and his little sledge hung over his shoulder. He shouted to Gerda, "I am going to the marketplace to play with the other boys." And away he went. In the marketplace, the boldest boys used often to fasten their sledges to the carts of the farmers, and then they got a good ride. When they were in the middle of their games, they drove into the square a large sledge, all white, and in it sat a figure dressed in a rough white fur, pelisse with a white fur cap on. The sledge drove twice round the square, and Kay fastened his little sledge behind it and drove off. It went quicker and quicker into the next street. The driver turned round and nodded to Kay in a friendly way, as if they had known each other before. Every time that Kay tried to unfasten his sledge, the driver nodded again, and Kay sat still once more. Then they drove out of the town, and the snow began to fall so thickly that the little boy could not see his hand before him, and on they went. He quickly unfastened the cord to get loose from the big sledge, but it was of no use. His little sledge hung on fast, and it went on like the wind. Then he cried out, but nobody heard him. He was dreadfully frightened. The snowflakes grew larger and larger till they looked like great white birds. All at once they flew aside. The large sledge stood still, and the figure who was driving stood up. The fur cloak and cap were all of snow. It was a lady, tall and slim and glittering. It was the Snow Queen. "We have come at a good rate," she said, "but you are almost frozen. Creep in under my cloak." And she set him close to her in the sledge and drew the cloak over him. He felt as though he were sinking into a snowdrift. "Are you cold now?" she asked, and kissed his forehead. The kiss was cold as ice and reached down to his heart, which was already half a lump of ice. "My sledge! Don't forget my sledge." He thought of that first, and it was fastened to one of the great white birds who flew behind with the sledge on its back. The Snow Queen kissed Kay again, and then he forgot all about little Gerda, his grandmother, and everybody at home. "Now I must not kiss you any more," she said, "or else I should kiss you to death." Then away they flew over forests and lakes, over sea and land. Round them whistled the cold wind, the wolves howled, and the snow hissed. Over them flew the black shrieking crows. But high up the moon shone large and bright, and thus Kay passed the long winter night. In the day he slept at the Snow Queen's feet. But what happened to little Gerda when Kay did not come back? What had become of him? Nobody knew. The other boys told how they had seen him fasten his sledge onto a large one, which had driven out of the town gate. Gerda cried a great deal. The winter was long and dark to her. Then the spring came with warm sunshine. "I will go and look for Kay," said Gerda. So she went down to the river and got into a little boat that was there. Presently the stream began to carry it away. "Perhaps the river will take me to Kay," thought Gerda. She glided down, past trees and fields, till she came to a large cherry garden, in which stood a little house with strange red and blue windows and a straw roof. Before the door stood 2 wooden soldiers who were shouldering arms. Gerda called to them, but they naturally did not answer. The river carried the boat on to the land. Gerda called out still louder, and there came out of the house a very old woman. She leant upon a crutch, and she wore a large sun hat, which was painted with the most beautiful flowers. "You poor little girl," said the old woman, and then she stepped into the water, brought the boat in close with her crutch, and lifted little Gerda out. "And now come and tell me who you are, and how you came here," she said. Then Gerda told her everything, and asked her if she had seen Kay. But she said he had not passed that way yet, but he would soon come. She told Gerda not to be sad, and that she should stay with her and take of the cherry trees and flowers, which were better than any picture book, as they could each tell a story. She then took Gerda's hand and led her into the little house and shut the door. The windows were very high, and the panes were red, blue, and yellow, so that the light came through in curious colors. On the table were the most delicious cherries, and the old woman let Gerda eat as many as she liked, while she combed her hair with a gold comb as she ate. The beautiful sunny hair rippled and shone round the dear little face, which was so soft and sweet. "I have always longed to have a dear little girl just like you, and you shall see how happy we will be together." And as she combed Gerda's hair, Gerda thought less and less about Kay, for the old woman was a witch, but not a wicked witch, for she only enchanted now and then to amuse herself, and she did want to keep little Gerda very much. So she went into the garden and waved her stick over all the rose bushes and blossoms and all. They sank down into the black earth, and no one could see where they had been. The old woman was afraid that if Gerda saw the roses, she would begin to think about her own, and then would remember Kay and run away. Then she led Gerda out into the garden. How glorious it was, and what lovely scents filled the air. All the flowers you can think of blossomed there all the year round. Gerda jumped for joy and played there till the sun set behind the tall cherry trees. And then she slept in a beautiful bed with red silk pillows filled with violets, and she slept soundly and dreamed as a queen does on her wedding day. The next day she played again with the flowers in the warm sunshine, and so many days passed by. Gerda knew every flower, but although there were so many, it seemed to her as if one were not there, though she could not remember which. She was looking one day at the old woman's sun hat, which had painted flowers on it, and there she saw a rose. The witch had forgotten to make that vanish when she had made the other roses disappear under the earth. It was so difficult to think of everything. "Why, there are no roses here," cried Gerda, and she hunted amongst all the flowers, but not one was to be found. Then she sat down and cried, but her tears fell just on the spot where a rose bush had sunk, and when her warm tears watered the earth, the bush came up in full bloom just as it had been before. Gerda kissed the roses and thought of the lovely roses at home, and with them came the thought of little Kay. "Oh, what have I been doing?" said the little girl. "I wanted to look for Kay." She ran to the end of the garden. The gate was shut, but she pushed against the rusty lock so that it came open. She ran out with her little bare feet. No one came after her. At last she could not run any longer, and she sat down on a large stone. When she looked round, she saw that the summer was over. It was late autumn. It had not changed in the beautiful garden, where were sunshine and flowers all the year round. "Oh dear, how late I have made myself," said Gerda. "It's autumn already. I cannot rest." And she sprang up to run on. Oh, how tired and sore her little feet grew, and it became colder and colder. She had to rest again, and there on the snow in front of her was a large crow. It had been looking at her for some time, and it nodded its head and said, "Caw, caw, good day." Then it asked the little girl why she was alone in the world. She told the crow her story and asked if he had seen Kay. The crow nodded very thoughtfully and said, "It might be. It might be." "What? Do you think you have?" cried the little girl, and she almost squeezed the crow to death as she kissed him. "Gently, gently," said the crow. I think, it might be little Kay. But now he has forgotten you for the princess." "Does he live with the princess?" asked Gerda. "Yes, listen," said the crow. Then he told her all he knew. In the kingdom in which we are now sitting lives a princess who is dreadfully clever. She has read all the newspapers in the world and has forgotten them again. She is as clever as that. The other day she came to the throne, and that is not so pleasant as people think. Then she began to say, "Why should I not marry?" But she wanted a husband who could answer when he was spoken to, not one who would stand up stiffly and look respectable. That would be too dull. When she told all the court ladies, they were delighted. "You can believe every word I say," said the crow. "I have a tame sweetheart in the palace, and she tells me everything." Of course his sweetheart was a crow. The newspapers came out next morning with a border of hearts round it and the princess's monogram on it, and inside you could read that every good-looking young man might come into the palace and speak to the princess, and whoever should speak loud enough to be heard would be well fed and looked after, and the one who spoke best should become the princess's husband. "Indeed," said the crow, "you can quite believe me. It is as true as that I am sitting here. Young men came in streams, and there was such a crowding and a mixing together. But nothing came of it on the first, nor on the second day. They could all speak quite well when they were in the street, but as soon as they came inside the palace door, and saw the guards in silver, and upstairs the footmen in gold, and the great hall all lighted up, then their wits left them. And when they stood in front of the throne where the princess was sitting, then they could not think of anything to say except to repeat the last word she had spoken, and she did not much care to hear that again. It seemed as if they were walking in their sleep until they came out into the street again, when they could speak once more. There was a row stretching from the gate of the town up to the castle. They were hungry and thirsty, but in the palace they did not even get a glass of water. A few of the cleverest had brought some slices of bread and butter with them, but they did not share them with their neighbor, for they thought, "If he looks hungry, the princess will not take him." "But what about Kay?" asked Gerda. "When did he come? Was he in the crowd?" "Wait a bit, we are coming to him." On the third day, a little figure came without horse or carriage and walked jauntily up to the palace. His eyes shone as yours do. He had lovely curling hair, but quite poor clothes. "That was Kay!" cried Gerda with delight. "Oh, then I have found him!" And she clapped her hands. "He had a little bundle on his back," said the crow. "No, it must have been his skates, for he went away with his skates." "Very likely," said the crow. "I did not see for certain. But I know this from my sweetheart, that when he came to the palace door and saw the royal guards in silver, and on the stairs the footmen in gold, he was not the least bit put out. He nodded to them, saying, 'It must be rather dull standing on the stairs. I would rather go inside.' The halls blazed with lights. Councillors and ambassadors were walking about in noiseless shoes carrying gold dishes. It was enough to make one nervous. His boots creaked dreadfully loud, but he was not frightened. "That must be Kay," said Gerda. "I know he had new boots on. I have heard them creaking in his grandmother's room." They did creak. "Certainly," said the crow. And, not one bit afraid, up he went to the princess, who was sitting on a large pearl as round as a spinning wheel. All the ladies in waiting were standing round, each with their attendants, and the lords in waiting with their attendants. The nearer they stood to the door, the prouder they were. "It must have been dreadful," said little Gerda, "and Kay did win the princess. I heard from my tame sweetheart that he was merry and quick-witted. He had not come to woo, he said, but to listen to the princess's wisdom. And the end of it was that they fell in love with each other." "Oh, yes, that was Kay," said Gerda. "He was so clever. He could do sums with fractions. Oh, do lead me to the palace." "That's easily said. answered the crow. "But how are we to manage that? I must talk it over with my tame sweetheart. She may be able to advise us, for I must tell you that a little girl like you could never get permission to enter it." "Yes, I will get it," said Gerda. "When Kay hears that I am there, he will come out at once and fetch me." "Wait for me by the railings," said the crow, and he nodded his head and flew away. It was late in the evening when he came back. "Caw, caw," he said, "I am to give you her love, and here is a little roll for you." She took it out of the kitchen. "There's plenty there, and you must be hungry. You cannot come into the palace. The guards in silver and the footmen in gold would not allow it. But don't cry, you shall get in all right. My sweetheart knows a little back stairs which leads to the sleeping room, and she knows where to find the key." They went into the garden, and when the lights in the palace were put out one after the other, the crow led Gerda to a back door. Oh, how Gerda's heart beat with anxiety and longing! It seemed as if she were going to do something wrong, but she only wanted to know if it were little Kay. Yes, it must be he. She remembered so well his clever eyes, his curly hair. She could see him smiling as he did when they were at home under the rose trees. He would be so pleased to see her, and to hear how they all were at home. Now they were on the stairs, a little lamp was burning, and on the landing stood the tame crow. She put her head on one side and looked at Gerda, who bowed as her grandmother had taught her. "My betrothed has told me many nice things about you, my dear young lady," she said. "Will you take the lamp while I go in front? We go this way so as to meet no one." Through beautiful rooms they came to the sleeping room. In the middle of it, hung on a thick rod of gold, were two beds shaped like lilies, one all white, in which lay the princess, and the other red, in which Gerda hoped to find Kay. She pushed aside the curtain and saw a brown neck. "Oh, it was Kay!" She called his name out loud, holding the lamp towards him. He woke up, turned his head, and it was not Kay. It was only his neck that was like Kay's, but he was young and handsome. The princess sat up in her lily bed and asked who was there. Then Gerda cried, and told her story and all that the crows had done. "You poor child," said the prince and princess, and they praised the crows and said that they were not angry with them, but that they must not do it again. Now they should have a reward. "Would you like to fly away free?" said the princess, "or will you have a permanent place as court crows with what you can get in the kitchen?" And both crows bowed and asked for a permanent appointment, for they thought of their old age. And they put Gerda to bed, and she folded her hands, thinking, as she fell asleep, "How good people and animals are to me!" The next day she was dressed from head to foot in silk and satin. They wanted her to stay on in the palace, but she begged for a little carriage and a horse and a pair of shoes, so that she might go out again into the world to look for Kay. They gave her a muff as well as some shoes. She was warmly dressed, and when she was ready, there in front of the door stood a coach of pure gold, with a coachman, footman, and postilions with gold crowns on. The prince and princess helped her into the carriage and wished her good luck. The wild crow, who was now married, drove with her for the first 3 miles. The other crow could not come because she had a bad headache. "Goodbye, goodbye," called the prince and princess, and little Gerda cried, and the crow cried. When he said goodbye, he flew on to a tree and waved with his black wings as long as the carriage, which shone like the sun, was in sight. They came at last to a dark wood, but the coach lit it up like a torch. When the robbers saw it, they rushed out, exclaiming, "Gold! Gold!" They seized the horses, killed the coachman, footman, and postilions, and dragged Gerda out of the carriage. "She is plump and tender. I will eat her," said the old robber queen, and she drew her long knife, which glittered horribly. "You shall not kill her," cried her little daughter. "She shall play with me. She shall give me her muff and her beautiful dress, and she shall sleep in my bed." The little robber girl was as big as Gerda, but was stronger, broader, with dark hair and black eyes. She threw her arms round Gerda and said, "They shall not kill you, so long as you are not naughty. Aren't you a princess?" "No," said Gerda, and she told all that had happened to her and how dearly she loved little Kay. The robber girl looked at her very seriously and nodded her head, saying, "They shall not kill you, even if you are naughty, for then I will kill you myself." And she dried Gerda's eyes and stuck both her hands in the beautiful warm muff. The little robber girl took Gerda to a corner of the robbers' camp, where she slept. All round were more than 100 wood pigeons, which seemed to be asleep, but they moved a little when the two girls came up. There was also, nearby, a reindeer which the robber girl teased by tickling it with her long, sharp knife. Gerda lay awake for some time. "Coo, coo," said the wood pigeons. "We have seen little Kay." A white bird carried his sledge. He was sitting in the Snow Queen's carriage, which drove over the forest when our little ones were in the nest. She breathed on them, and all except we two died. "Coo, coo. What are you saying over there?" cried Gerda. "Where was the Snow Queen going to? Do you know at all?" "She was probably travelling to Lapland, where there is always ice and snow. Ask the reindeer." "There is capital ice and snow there," said the reindeer. "One can jump about there in the great sparkling valleys. There the Snow Queen has her summer palace, but her best palace is up by the North Pole, on the island called Spitzbergen." "Oh, Kay, my little Kay," sobbed Gerda. "You must lie still," said the little robber girl, "or else I shall stick my knife into you." In the morning, Gerda told her all that the wood pigeons had said. She nodded. "Do you know where Lapland is?" she asked the reindeer. "Who should know better than I?" said the beast, and his eyes sparkled. "I was born and bred there on the snowfields." "Listen," said the robber girl to Gerda. "You see that all the robbers have gone. Only my mother is left, and she will fall asleep in the afternoon. Then I will do something for you." When her mother had fallen asleep, the robber girl went up to the reindeer and said, "I am going to set you free so that you can run to Lapland. But you must go quickly and carry this little girl to the Snow Queen's palace, where her playfellow is." You must have heard all that she told about it, for she spoke loud enough. The reindeer sprang high for joy. The robber girl lifted little Gerda up and had the foresight to tie her on firmly, and even gave her a little pillow for a saddle. "You must have your fur boots," she said, "for it will be cold. But I shall keep your muff, for it is so cozy. But, so that you may not freeze, here are my mother's great fur gloves. They will come up to your elbows. Creep into them." And Gerda cried for joy. "Don't make such faces," said the little robber girl. "You must look very happy. And here are 2 loaves and a sausage. Now you won't be hungry." They were tied to the reindeer. The little robber girl opened the door, made all the big dogs come away, cut through the halter with her sharp knife, and said to the reindeer, "Run now, but take great care of the little girl." And Gerda stretched out her hands with the large fur gloves towards the little robber girl and said, "Goodbye." Then the reindeer flew over the ground, through the great forest, as fast as he could. The wolves howled, the ravens screamed, the sky seemed on fire. "Those are my dear old northern lights," said the reindeer. "See how they shine." And then he ran faster still, day and night. The loaves were eaten, and the sausage also, and then they came to Lapland. They stopped by a wretched little house. The roof almost touched the ground, and the door was so low that you had to creep in and out. There was no one in the house except an old Lapland woman who was cooking fish over an oil lamp. The reindeer told Gerda's whole history, but first he told his own, for that seemed to him much more important, and Gerda was so cold that she could not speak. "Ah, you poor creatures," said the Lapland woman, "you have still further to go. You must go over 100 miles into Finland, for there the Snow Queen lives, and every night she burns Bengal lights. I will write some words on a dried stockfish, for I have no paper, and you must give it to the Finland woman, for she can give you better advice than I can." And when Gerda was warmed and had had something to eat and drink, the Lapland woman wrote on a dried stockfish and begged Gerda to take care of it, tied Gerda securely on the reindeer's back, and away they went again. The whole night was ablaze with northern lights, and then they came to Finland and knocked at the Finland woman's chimney, for door she had none. Inside it was so hot that the Finland woman wore very few clothes. She loosened Gerda's clothes and drew off her fur gloves and boots. She laid a piece of ice on the reindeer's head and then read what was written on the stockfish. She read it over 3 times till she knew it by heart, and then put the fish in the saucepan, for she never wasted anything. Then the reindeer told his story, and afterwards little Gerda's and the Finland woman blinked her eyes but said nothing. "You are very clever," said the reindeer. "I know. Cannot you give the little girl a drink so that she may have the strength of 12 men and overcome the Snow Queen?" "The strength of 12 men," said the Finland woman. "That would not help much. Little Kay is with the Snow Queen, and he likes everything there very much and thinks it the best place in the world. But that is because he has a splinter of glass in his heart and a bit in his eye. If these do not come out, he will never be free, and the Snow Queen will keep her power over him. But cannot you give little Gerda something so that she can have power over her? I can give her no greater power than she has already. Don't you see how great it is? Don't you see how men and beasts must help her when she wanders into the wide world with her bare feet? She is powerful already, because she is a dear little innocent child. If she cannot by herself conquer the Snow Queen and take away the glass splinters from little Kay, we cannot help her. The Snow Queen's garden begins 2 miles from here. You can carry the little maiden so far. Put her down by the large bush with red berries growing in the snow. Then you must come back here as fast as you can." Then the Finland woman lifted little Gerda on the reindeer, and away he sped. "Oh, I have left my gloves and boots behind," cried Gerda. She missed them in the piercing cold, but the reindeer did not dare to stop. On he ran till he came to the bush with red berries. Then he set Gerda down and kissed her mouth, and great big tears ran down his cheeks. And then he ran back. There stood poor Gerda without shoes or gloves in the middle of the bitter cold of Finland. She ran on as fast as she could. A regiment of gigantic snowflakes came against her, but they melted when they touched her, and she went on with fresh courage. And now we must see what Kay was doing. He was not thinking of Gerda, and never dreamt that she was standing outside the palace. The walls of the palace were built of driven snow, and the doors and windows of piercing winds. There were more than 100 halls in it, all of frozen snow. The largest was several miles long. The bright northern lights lit them up, and very large and empty and cold and glittering they were. In the middle of the great hall was a frozen lake, which had cracked in 1,000 pieces. Each piece was exactly like the other. Here the Snow Queen used to sit when she was at home. Little Kay was almost blue and black with cold, but he did not feel it, for she had kissed away his feelings, and his heart was a lump of ice. He was pulling about some sharp, flat pieces of ice, and trying to fit one into the other. He thought each was most beautiful, but that was because of the splinter of glass in his eye. He fitted them into a great many shapes, but he wanted to make them spell the word love. The Snow Queen had said, "If you can spell out that word, you shall be your own master. I will give you the whole world and a new pair of skates." But he could not do it. "Now I must fly to warmer countries," said the Snow Queen. "I must go and powder my black kettles." This was what she called Mount Etna and Mount Vesuvius. It does the lemons and grapes good. And off she flew, and Kay sat alone in the great hall trying to do his puzzle. He sat so still that you would have thought he was frozen. Then it happened that little Gerda stepped into the hall. The biting cold winds became quiet, as if they had fallen asleep when she appeared in the great, empty, freezing hall. She caught sight of Kay. She recognized him and ran and put her arms round his neck, crying, "Kay, dear little Kay, I have found you at last." But he sat quite still and cold. Then Gerda wept hot tears which fell on his neck and thawed his heart and swept away the bit of the looking-glass. He looked at her and then he burst into tears. He cried so much that the glass splinter swam out of his eye. Then he knew her and cried out, "Gerda, dear little Gerda, where have you been so long?" "And where have I been?" And he looked round him. "How cold it is here, how wide and empty." And he threw himself on Gerda, and she laughed and wept for joy. It was such a happy time that the pieces of ice even danced round them for joy. And when they were tired and lay down again, they formed themselves into the letters that the Snow Queen had said he must spell in order to become his own master and have the whole world and a new pair of skates. And Gerda kissed his cheeks, and they grew rosy. She kissed his eyes, and they sparkled like hers. She kissed his hands and feet, and he became warm and glowing. The Snow Queen might come home now, his release. The word love stood written in sparkling ice. They took each other's hands and wandered out of the great palace. They talked about the grandmother and the roses on the leads. Wherever they came, the winds hushed and the sun came out. When they reached the bush with red berries, there stood the reindeer waiting for them. He carried Kay and Gerda first to the Finland woman, who warmed them in her hot room and gave them advice for their journey home. Then they went to the Lapland woman, who gave them new clothes and mended their sleigh. The reindeer ran with them until they came to the green fields, fresh with the spring green. "Here," he said, "goodbye." They came to the forest, which was bursting into bud, and out of it came a splendid horse which Gerda knew. It was the one which had drawn the gold coach ridden by a young girl with a red cap on and pistols in her belt. It was the little robber girl who was tired of being at home and wanted to go out into the world. She and Gerda knew each other at once. "You are a nice fellow," she said to Kay. "I should like to know if you deserve to be run all over the world." But Gerda patted her cheeks and asked after the prince and princess. "They are travelling about," said the robber girl. "And the crow?" asked Gerda. "Oh, the crow is dead," answered the robber girl. "His tame sweetheart is a widow and hops about with a bit of black crape round her leg. She makes a great fuss, but that's all nonsense. But tell me what happened to you and how you caught him." And Kay and Gerda told her all. "Dear, dear," said the robber girl, shook both their hands, and promised that if she came to their town she would come and see them. Then she rode on, but Gerda and Kay went home hand in hand. There they found the grandmother, and everything just as it had been. But when they went through the doorway, they found they were grown up. There were the roses on the leads. It was summer. Warm, glorious summer.